Good morning, everyone. Welcome back from spring break. I hope you all had a good week off. As a reminder, if you're in class and are at all able, please turn your cameras on so that I can see you. Thanks to those who are doing that. And just wanted to kind of check in, make sure. You should have seen my email that came out a couple days ago, just kind of with an update on the course. So at this point, the grades that you see in the grade book are inclusive of everything that has been turned in. Your written reflections. Everybody will check their.
I don't have to now, but
also. Written reflections were graded over the break. All of your attendance and participation scores are up to date now. And then midterms, I sent out a note with some specific clarification on the midterms. Did anyone have questions or concerns related to that? So are you able to see your specific midterm score? Okay, in the grade book or when you review your attempt? I tried to manually mess with the settings on that so that you could see, but just if you didn't look back, be aware that what you scored initially was not your actual score because there were 2 questions that were entered incorrectly into the computer. So it did not grade your short answer. I had to go in and manually grade those. So everyone's score improved at least 7.5 points, I believe, as a general rule of thumb. Okay, so looking forward in the course, and I apologize, my voice is, I've got some allergy sinus stuff going on. Looking forward in the class, things are gonna kind of start moving quickly. We have a couple more weeks where we will spend the asynchronous day sort of reflecting on the content from the first part of the week. But about week 12 or 13, we're going to start hitting 1 chapter per week to work our way through the rest of the text by the end of the class. And so things are going to start moving more quickly. And the only thing that I can say is that if you're dissatisfied with your work in the class thus far, the final will be a written final versus anything on As You Learn in terms of multiple choice or short answer, true, false. And so hopefully folks will be able to, write in a more reflective way to demonstrate understanding of the course content on the final. Please make sure that you get those written reflections 6 through 10 completed. If you have not turned in written reflections 1 through 5, there are several people who did not do those assignments. That's pretty significant in terms of how it's going to impact your grade, as well as there are people who have not taken exam 1 and the midterm. And so, at this point, you're probably not even on this call if that applies to you. But if you have missing work in this class, reach out to me. We can set up a time to talk, or we can communicate through email and figure out how to get you caught up so that you can pass the course. Because that is my goal. I don't want people to fail this. It's an elective for most of you. And I want to help you get through. So connect with me if you need to. All right, today we are going to be talking about, I'm so sorry. We're going to be talking about communication in relationships. And I would just like to kind of start this by saying that, a lot of what we've been talking about up to this point is kind of giving you perspective on relationships, laying the groundwork for different types of relationships. But this piece about communication, we're tying it into how it relates to technology, but particularly communication in relationships. I mean, we are all going to be in relationships in our lives, even if you choose to stay single and not to have a family. And this bit about how we communicate with one another can be super impactful in terms of helping you navigate those interpersonal relationships. So we are going to talk about effective communication and what that looks like. Going to look at some contrasts between genders as well as cultures. we again are taking that sort of choices in relationship approach to look at choices related to communication and technology that can benefit a relationship. Going to look at some negative impacts of secrecy, and then the flip side of that is self-disclosure, so openness, and how those influence and impact relationships. We'll talk a little bit about lying and cheating, technology and cell phone etiquette, and then talk a little about conflict resolution strategies. So we're really going to kind of dig into, you know, what does communication, especially effective communication, look like between two or more individuals. So first and foremost, let's define effective communication, and kind of talk about what that looks like. It is communication that is shared in an accurate and timely manner. Effective communication also reflects reality and will benefit the receiver in the now. Okay, so an example of effective communication with a partner is, I'm beginning to lose feelings for you. And then that might lead into a conversation about why or what's going on, versus telling someone, I lost feelings for you years ago and I want a divorce. You know, you've already missed the boat there. So effective communication is timely and is communicating reality to the partner. It involves nonverbal communication. And so nonverbal communication is basically defined as the message about the message. This is obviously inclusive of gestures, eye contact, posture, tone, etc. So if you say, I love you, like that, with your arms crossed, and you're not conveying, you know, warmth and tenderness, that is different than when you know, look someone in the eyes, you're gazing sort of lovingly at them, sustaining eye contact, and you tell them, I love you. They come across very differently. So the message about the message, often what we quote unquote hear, or what we receive in terms of communication, comes more from those nonverbal cues than even the words that someone says. We all know what flirting is. So it's showing an interest in another person without serious intent. It can include smiles, touch, funny comments. And the text points out, and this is kind of where the the technology piece comes in, is that, you know, pick up kind of one-liners of the past have shifted now to emojis, GIFs, memes. You know, we communicate in sort of a different language using technology, but it can be flirtatious in nature as well. And that, you know, we often think of flirting as how we sort of initiate a relationship with a romantic partner. But flirting can continue even, you know, in a marriage, and it's not necessarily showing an interest in another person without serious intent, but it's, you know, kind of a joking, casual way of communicating with your partner, even if you've been together for a while. And then this idea of words versus actions goes along with the nonverbal communication piece to a certain extent. A lot of our social interaction depends on us saying things that sound positive, but actually have very little impact on behavior. So a lot of times people have these kind of passing comments like, yeah, let's get together, let's do something sometime. And those are intentionally vague kind of gestures towards another person. But really what it communicates is a refusal to prioritize the time to commit to a specific plan. So it's different than saying, let's go eat Thursday at the local, you know, and you check your calendars to make sure that that works for you both. It's just this sort of like nonchalant, you know, attempt to pretend almost like you want to do something with the other person, but maybe don't necessarily. So we're going to get now into the gender and culture piece. If you guys can think of anything to put into the chat related to differences in gender when you think about how men versus women kind of show up in relationships related to communication. You know, we've all seen this book or heard the phrase, at least the book's pretty old at this point. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And, you know, it's based on some stereotypical assumptions of men and women. But a lot of those are grounded somewhat in actual experience. So if anyone has anything to add to the chat about how you see men and women as being different in terms of their communication styles, we'll use those as some talking points. Someone says women tend to communicate better than men. Can you define better a little more specifically? Because I think that's, someone else says men seem to show communication through actions rather than words. Women communicate feelings more than men. So men speak through action rather than words. And I think that has been, yes. And I think someone else, you know, just kind of unpacked that idea of communicating better. Women are more easily able to communicate about feelings than men, generally speaking. Women tend to want to communicate more about relationship issues. They view issues in the relationship from more of an emotional standpoint, and they want to talk about problems or things that have happened more easily and more frequently than men. Men might have some difficulty with this emotional intimacy in conversation. And some theorist researchers have suggested that, you know, men typically play that provider role in the relationship. And they suggest that this provider role, you know, the need to feel like they are, excuse me, providing for their family, prevents men from being able to be vulnerable and makes them sort of want to stay in control rather than, you know, admitting that they need to discuss an issue or are feeling emotional about something. I have a personal story, just a little anecdote that I think really kind of demonstrates this issue around communication. Comes up in my family often with my husband. He will say something like a really short, you know, whatever, and he thinks he has communicated something clearly to me. And I'm like, that's not what I heard you just say. But one morning, as I was leaving for work, you know, we kissed each other goodbye in the kitchen. We're headed out the door, and he said, give me just a second, I'm right behind you. To which I thought he meant, you know, I'm coming out the door right behind you. Like just a way to say goodbye. You know, I didn't think anything of it. And I drive a Honda Pilot, so it sits up pretty high. His car is a sedan, and it was behind me, and I was in the garage. He was behind me in the driveway. So what he was really trying to say was, give me just a second. My car is parked right behind yours, and I need to back out first, you know? But all he said was, give me a second, I'm right behind you. I didn't think anything of it. And I slammed my Pilot into the front end of his car because I couldn't see it behind me in the driveway. And so, you know, years later, we can kind of look back on that situation and chuckle about it. But it really does highlight this, this idea that, like, sometimes you think you've said something that did not come across, you know, and so we need to be really clear and specific in our communication. And I do think that there are specific differences between genders that kind of relate to that idea. And then also some cultural differences. The text points out that African Americans tend to have more direct communication styles than white Americans. And then, you know, in kind of contrast to both of those, that type of directness might be seen as inappropriate from someone from a Latino background. So sometimes interpretations of communication styles, as well as specific words, can vary across cultures. And so we need to understand that and, you know how we might best be respectful of folks, especially people with different cultural or ethnic backgrounds than ourselves. So we are gonna spend probably the majority of our time talking about these choices for effective communication. So what does effective communication look like, sound like, feel like? And then I want you to be aware that for your asynchronous content for this week, you will have an article related to this reflective listening I statement idea, and then some discussion questions are related to that. While we're on that note, if you guys will take a second to go ahead and type your name into the chat for attendance purposes. And then the asynchronous work is another way that you can make sure that your course grade, is up to par. That does all get factored into attendance and participation. And so that's another avenue where you can, do some work if you haven't been keeping up with those to make sure that you're getting that done. All right, so effective communication. Number 1 says make communication a priority. When communicating is a priority, partners in a relationship will make time for communication to occur in a protected setting with no interruptions. I think it's really important to think about the role of cell phones in this scenario. Nothing drives me crazier than, and it's not just with my husband, sometimes I'll be talking to my dad and he's like scrolling Facebook. That just does not suggest that you're listening to me or invested in what I'm trying to say, So if you're trying to have prioritized communication with a partner, I think it's best to make sure that you don't have anything, especially a cell phone. Sometimes young children in the house, you have to get those distractions away from the communications setting, whatever that looks like. The second point is to avoid negative or harmful statements. So an example of how you would not want to say this: you were completely insensitive and rude not to call me when you knew you would be late. That does not communicate the positive about the other person. So if you flip that around to say something along the lines of, I know you got overwhelmed and busy, but can you please try to call me in the future, even when you're tied up, to let me know you're going to be late? That's a totally different presentation of information. You're basically saying the same thing without name calling or labeling the partner. But it's just kind of coming at it from avoiding the negative or the hurtful statements and just stating what is. I need you to call me when you're going to be late, even if you're busy. Another rule of thumb, and I think this one shows up for me personally, but it's something that I do try to live by, is this idea of avoiding always and never. So realistically speaking, no one always or never does anything, I mean, we might have a tendency to do the same thing a lot, but we pretty much don't always do one thing. And so telling your partner or even your children, you always or you never listen when you never clean your room, those are just not beneficial comments. And so thinking of a way to communicate what you're trying to say without those, kind of indefinite statements is also a way to promote effective communication. Positive comments, right? So in the research around effective communication, a low frequency of negative comments and a high frequency of positive comments was associated with relationship satisfaction. So people feel better about their relationships when there is more positive being shared than not. Number 4, about eye contact. Eye contact allows for deeper understanding of the message and the intent of the information. So it relates back to the nonverbal communication. But eye contact is one of those ways to really engage with the partner and sustain effective communication. Open-ended questions. So an open-ended question sounds like, how do you feel about going to the farmer's market on Saturday versus do you want to go to the farmer's market on Saturday? One is really only available for a yes or no, and then it's up to the partner to insert feelings or other ideas in the yes or no comment. But how do you feel about something is an open-ended way to get the communication going. So that's another effective communication strategy. And then number 6 and 7 are kind of interrelated: reflective listening and I statements. So reflective listening is really a practice of truly hearing what the partner is sharing and then paraphrasing back to them what has been said in a way that honors their feelings. So you're going to be listening for the message that's coming across. You're going to analyze the meaning of the message. And then when you reflect the message back to the speaker, you're trying to confirm that you understood correctly. So it sounds kind of like, what I heard you say was, you feel blah, blah, blah. and my husband might not say, I feel anyway. He might just say, God, today sucked. Work was so hard. So-and-so didn't show up, whatever. And what I reflect back is, wow, it sounds like you had a stressful day. I heard you say you were frustrated that so-and-so called out, or, whatever. That's just kind of an example, but it's analyzing for the bigger picture meaning of what has been said, especially as it relates to the partner's feelings. And the reading that you're going to do for Thursday or Wednesday talks about simple and complex reflective listening strategies, where you're, inferring deeper meaning, emotionality, etc. And so make sure you read through that, because again, I think this stuff is really just important for like developing a life skill that can serve you in the future. And then number 7, again, it's this idea of instead of communicating like a fault or a flaw in the person. So, oh, you're so lazy, you never pick up your clothes, is not what you want to say, right? I feel frustrated when I have to pick your dirty laundry up off the floor. That's an I statement about how it makes me feel. And I'm still communicating, I wish you would pick your clothes up off the floor. But I'm just doing it in a way that's avoidant of some of those more negative things. Touch, another example of nonverbal communication, can indicate closeness, warm feelings, can really go a long ways towards, again, kind of softening the conversation and engaging and maintaining engagement. So number 9 says use soft emotions. Soft emotions are emotions like sadness, hurt. When you're trying to communicate around an issue, you want to use soft emotions rather than hard emotions. Hard emotions are anger, frustration. And then sometimes there are flat emotions like indifference, boredom, you're just kind of apathetic to the conversation. So just being aware that soft emotions go a lot further in terms of facilitating communication. So it's kind of like you attract more flies with honey, coming across as angry and frustrated, or like you just don't care, is less effective than showing that, something is really bothering you, or you're not feeling, good about this thing that's happening. Number 10 says identify specific new behavior that you would like to see. So a lot of the work that I do is with young children, and part of what we teach in terms of how you guide children's behavior is that you want to tell the child what you would like to see them do instead of what you want to see them stop doing, right? The same concept applies in our relationships with other people, because we as humans, like, our brains are just geared to be more responsive to positive language. We tend to kind of ignore or shut down when we hear someone saying no, stop, don't. And we respond better when we hear, what are the things that you want us to be doing? So telling your partner, you know, it would really help me out if you could pick your laundry up off the floor so that I don't have to come behind and blah, 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 is more effective than please stop leaving your laundry laying everywhere, you know. It's just a little bit more rational and a little bit more specific in terms of how you can, you know, shift the behavior to help the relationship. Number 11 is, I think, important, especially when you're involved in interpersonal conflict, and that is to stay focused on the issue at hand. So the opposite of that is called branching. And branching is where you shift the focus. You're talking about other issues, other instances. And really what this does is it tends to lead towards more conflict and creates a space for blame, defensiveness, deferral, all of those kind of negative things. So even if the issue has happened, you know, multiple times over the course of your relationship, it's best to stay focused on the present issue, because all that other stuff just tends to lead down kind of a dirty path in terms of communication. Number 12, specific resolutions to disagreements. So if a partner is having an effective communication experience with their, you know, with their partner, this should resolve in creating a plan to kind of address whatever the specific issue is if it arises again in the future. So both partners have kind of shared their side of, you know, how this makes them feel or what the issue specifically is. And then you want to come to consensus on how are we going to avoid this happening again in the future. And that gives you kind of a place to refer back to, you know, the plan. This is what we said we were going to do. Please help me with blah, blah, blah. Congruence in communication, number 13. Congruence is when your nonverbal and your verbal cues match. So, you know, at the beginning of class, I said saying, I love you too, you know, that just does not come across the same way, or you're trying to communicate something other than I love you, you know, it's sarcastic, it's kind of off-putting. And so, you know, okay, you're right. Yeah, you're right. That's different than saying, okay, you're right. You know, it's just the tone of voice, the eye contact. And so, you know, when you're trying for effective communication, you have to avoid the incongruence between what's coming out of your mouth and your nonverbal behaviors. If you want, you know, resolution and such. Number 14, we've talked about power dynamics in relationships before. And so one of the ways to ensure that you're communicating effectively with a partner is to demonstrate shared power. The text talks about this idea of the principle of least interest. And that is the idea that the person with the least interest in continuing the relationship is the person who holds the power. So communication of power and interest in the relationship can both be demonstrated in a variety of ways. Withdrawing from the conversation or from the relationship in general, trying to induce guilt, lying, deception. Those are all ways that we communicate power in the relationship, right? And so, you know, if both partners avoid those types of things, if both partners are showing up, are, you know, being honest, not trying to throw blame or guilt on the other person, they're sharing power. And that is a way to make sure that you're working together to resolve issues that come up. And then the last point is really just that ongoing communication is critical. So it's not enough to just say, you know, here's the issue, here's how we're going to resolve it in the future, and then to let that be, because even if both partners are doing the thing that they said that they agreed upon to help resolve the issue, it's still beneficial to keep talking about it and say, hey, this is really working, you know, thank you for helping me, blah, 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 whatever. But talking about both the positives as well as the negatives is a critical part of healthy relationships. And so keeping direct and indirect communication ongoing is really important. The text points out also that communication is about two different elements. It is about content, which is the information that we're sharing. And communication also exists around context, which is about the process or the interactions. And so being aware that, you know, as much as it's not just about what we say, but it's about, you know, our nonverbal communication, we also need to look at our process and our interactions around communication to make sure that those are positive and effective as well. Self-disclosure and secrets. So self-disclosure is this idea of being open to revealing, you know, personal information, feelings about yourself to another person. Self-disclosure is positively related to positive outcomes in relationships. So the more that a person engages in this type of openness, the more relationship satisfaction that they will see. Easterling did some research on secrets in relationships, and they uncovered these 5 sort of facts, again with the awareness that secrecy is related to negative outcomes in relationships. So first and foremost, most couples keep secrets from one another. And, you know, there are a variety of reasons and sort of rationales for that, but it does happen in most relationships. Understanding that, these other 4 points are kind of, you know, what we know about secrets beyond the fact that most couples keep them. We know that females tend to keep more secrets. And this might just look like, you know, bringing in your shopping bags when your partner can't necessarily see how many bags you're bringing in. You're not overtly lying about the fact that you went shopping. You're not, you know, it's just, it's almost like a lie by omission because you're not completely disclosing, I brought home $300 worth of stuff or whatever. Married couples tend to keep more secrets. So spouses in the relationship tend to keep more secrets than cohabitating partners or, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend type of relationships. The research has also uncovered that African Americans, as well as gays and lesbians, tend to keep more secrets. I don't think that the text offers any information beyond, you know, just those kind of statistics, but you know, if you fall into the category of females or gay and lesbian, it would be important to kind of examine, you know, do I do that? And if so, is it going to create, you know, more successful outcomes in my relationships? Awareness is always kind of the first step. So again, any dishonesty undermines a relationship. And dishonesty can be, as I said, overt, deliberate, like a flat out blatant lie, or it can be more subtle, like a behavioral deception, a lie of omission, just kind of sneaking things where you're not specifically lying, but you're also not being honest. Neither of those are good. And so now some considerations about technology. You know, I think this theme has kind of come up over the course of our time together often, that texting, social media use, all of these kind of ways that we use technology, dating apps, you know, at the end of the day, these tend to be negatively related to our relationships, or they contribute to relationship problems. There's often a mismatch in terms of partner use between like amount of time, time of day, et cetera, around use of particularly social media and just technology in general. You know, the assumption is that if you're married, you're probably not, unless you're in an open marriage, using dating apps and things like that. But even just Facebooking, you know, so my husband, you know, he's at work all day. He works a very physical job. He does not have the opportunity to be on his phone during the day. So a lot of times when he comes home after dinner, he just wants to kind of sit and zone out and scroll on, you know, Instagram or whatever. And for me, I have my phone with me all day. So I've kind of already checked in on social media, and I want him there present with me, you know, and I'm not necessarily using my phone at that time of day. And that has been a source of conflict in our relationship. So it's something that we've had to communicate about and kind of set some ground rules for, to understand, you know, how's this going to work in our relationship, especially when we have those different availabilities for using it. There is a term in the book that you should be aware of called nomophobia. And this is basically sort of a new phenomena where a person is so dependent on virtual environments to engage with other people that they have developed a social phobia of kind of being in real life, IRL, with people. So it is complete dependency on the virtual environment. And again, obviously a negative outcome of this kind of technology world that we're living in. We also, excuse me, have new issues like sexting, revenge porn, all of these things that have sort of come out in recent years, again, related to our technology use, as potential threats to a relationship or potential negative pieces of a relationship. And then video mediated communication, basically we're engaging in that right now. This is a way that, you know, people, especially folks, if you think back to those long distance relationships or the LATs, which are the living apart together people, that we've talked about previously in the course, a lot of those folks are staying connected through VMC or video mediated communication. And so that, you know, this can be seen as a positive, but it also has some challenges related to it as well. So we've kind of already, you know, we've established that conflict in relationship happens, right? And we've talked about some ways to sort of navigate that using effective communication techniques. But just some kind of key points to understand about conflict resolution. Conflict resolution has to occur when there are reoccurring and disturbing issues within the relationship. It needs to identify desired new behaviors. And that was one of the points we discussed earlier. It's important when you're trying to resolve a conflict to understand your partner's perspective. And so we discussed a lot of strategies that can help you sort of get to that. But if you feel like you're engaged in communication or trying to resolve a conflict where you're not being heard or you're not hearing your partner, and it's easier to notice when you're not being heard, right? But not so much when you're not hearing your partner. But there is a sort of rule of thumb where you just kind of table the communication and say, like, this is not working, you know, we can revisit this later, and then just sort of take space from it and come back to it. But the ultimate goal is to generate win-win solutions, or, you know, sometimes a compromise where both parties feel like they're being heard and like their wishes are being honored to a certain extent. Forgiveness is a huge piece of successful relationships with anybody, right? We're all human. We all make mistakes. We all do things, you know, that we wish we hadn't. And so in the same way that I have to extend that forgiveness to myself, to my partners, you know, I also hope that people that relate with me will extend forgiveness to me when it's needed. And then another thing that's really important, and this is kind of related to that idea of, staying in the issue that's happening, is avoiding recovery sabotage. Recovery sabotage is the idea of holding the past over a partner. So you're not letting go of previous issues. You're kind of refusing to forgive or to move forward. And ultimately that sort of undermines and destroys the relationship altogether. So you have to avoid recovery sabotage in your partner relationships. And then the last thing that I want to talk about, and this is again, things that we want to avoid in terms of communication and relationships. These are 4 defense mechanisms that can kind of show up differently for each of us, but they are escapism, rationalization, projection, and displacement. Escapism, what that typically looks like in relationships is this idea of busyness. I'm too busy to communicate with you about that. I'm too busy to hang out, to be present, whatever. So it might look like, I work all the time. Workaholism. But, not being available for your partner because you're working all the time is a really typical issue in relationships. It can look like zoning out on the TV and just, Netflixing by yourself all night instead of showing up and talking with your partner. Again, being on your cell phone. There's actually a term now for intentionally avoiding a partner through use of a cell phone. It's called phubbing with a PH, PHUBBING. And again, it's this kind of like overt avoidance of the partner by just zoning out and scrolling on your phone. And then drugs and alcohol are another way that people tend to try to escape from relationships and communication. Rationalization, we all know what it looks like to try to rationalize our behavior. And so it's this personal or cognitive kind of justification for my behavior. A lot of times this shows up in apologies, right? So it's like, I'm really sorry I said that, but you blah, blah, blah. And so that's why I said what I said. You're trying to rationalize and you're still trying to hold on to this idea that you were right. I had a good therapist once that said, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And sometimes it's letting go of that idea that like, I'm right and my husband's wrong, just because I want peace and stability in the relationship. So avoiding those ways of rationalizing your bad behavior or your bad communication are really important. Projection, this is the idea of attributing your own thoughts, feelings, wants, etc. to someone else. And you're avoiding recognition that these are your own thoughts, feelings, etc. So, really the key here is kind of own how you feel, own what you want, and let that be what it is. But you can't put that on your partner because you might not share the same feelings, wants, wishes, etc. And finally, displacement. I'm so sorry. Whew. Displacement is shifting feelings from another experience onto your partner. So you might have come out of a negative relationship or had some, traumatic history that you are allowing to show up in your current relationship. Or it could be as simple as, I had a really crappy day at work. I come home super frustrated, and then I put that onto my partner because I'm grumpy and ill and short-tempered with them. So I'm displacing what happened to me earlier in the day even, and allowing that to show up in my relationship. Again, not going to serve you well in terms of how you relate to one another in the home or in the partnership. And we want to avoid all of these things so that we can engage in effective communication and conflict resolution. And I literally cannot talk anymore, which is good because we're at the end of all that I wanted to say. I think I have everyone recorded as being on the call. And so please make sure that you look at what's on As You Learn for the second half of the week. And again, reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns about where we are to this point. Thank you all for bearing with my scratchiness today, and hopefully I'll sound better next week when we see each other again. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that.